You take the job because the money is better than anything else that close to Blackwood Creek. And honestly, you thrive on silence. The title is Night Custodian, but the reality is you're a lone watcher from midnight to dawn. You arrive at the WCHM Tower, a skeletal, rusted structure that pierces the perpetual low fog like a metal ghost. The main office building below it is squat, concrete, and smells perpetually of ozone and dust. The old caretaker, a man named Silas, hands you a thick brass key and a laminated sheet of paper. He eyes you with a strange mixture of pity and warning, his voice a low, gravelly sound that seems to absorb the air around it. This is your training, your induction into the world of broadcast silence. He tells you the station is automated now. The DJs, the news reports, it all runs off a massive server rack locked in the basement. Your job is simple. Mop the floor, wipe the consoles, and keep the silence. That last part, you realize quickly, is the most important part. Silas pauses, gripping your shoulder with a surprisingly strong hand, and then he introduces you to the rules. These aren't just work rules, they are survival protocols. He says they keep the tower's shadow from getting too thick. The first rule is simple. Never answer the phone after 3 o'clock a.m. He explains that's when the dead air hour truly begins, the time when most of the city is in a deep REM cycle and the veil thins. The second rule, always keep the studio door ajar. Never lock it, never close it fully, because whatever is outside hates the feeling of a clean boundary. The third rule, do not, under any circumstances, look out the attic window. He never says what you might see, just that seeing it changes you. And the fourth, the one he whispers, never speak the station's full call sign out loud. You're already thinking of reasons why radio superstition, historical trauma, some forgotten broadcast gone wrong, but you don't argue. You just pocket the list. You remember reading once about the Dyatlov Pass incident, where experienced hikers seemingly fled their tents in sub-zero temperatures for no discernible reason, suggesting some unknown external terror drove them. Researchers still argue whether it was real, but the atmosphere here feels like that, a palpable sense of wrongness that defies logic. You look at the heavy silence of the building, and you feel that deep, unnerving certainty that something here is listening. Something that doesn't care about a mop bucket or a time card. You realize that while sleep paralysis is often explained as a disconnect between the brain's sleep and wake cycles, the feeling of a presence, a heavy pressure on your chest, is so universal it suggests a primal fear built into our consciousness. The first 3 hours pass in a nervous, cleaning trance. You finish the break room, polish the dusty reception desk, and finally approach the main control room, the heart of the empty tower. The clock on the wall ticks over to 3:01 a.m., and you feel the air drop 10 degrees. The hum of the equipment suddenly sounds louder, more frantic, like a trapped insect. You wipe down the console, your cloth passing over the thick, soundproof glass of the main broadcast booth. And that's when you hear it. The air is supposed to be dead. The sound isn't loud, but it's undeniably there, a brief, sharp intake of breath on the other side of the glass. You freeze, the damp cloth forgotten on the mixing board. The room is tiny, just the control console and the broadcast booth, both empty. You know, the doors are locked until 6. Yet the sound was definite, like someone had been leaning close to the dead air microphone and just realized they were being heard. You turn slowly, peering through the glass. The booth is dark, bathed only in the red glow of a single ON air light, which you distinctly remember being off. You take a step back, your heart a frantic, panicked drum against your ribs. Then, you see the second anomaly. On the desk inside the booth, next to the microphone, is a small, polished stone. It wasn't there 5 minutes ago. You remember the eerie fact that certain objects, often referred to as focusing agents or even cursed artifacts in folklore, like the Hope Diamond or the Annabelle doll, seem to generate their own gravitational field of misfortune and tragedy, almost as if they absorb and re-emit bad energy. You take a steadying breath, trying to rationalize it. Sila's must have dropped it, a forgotten artifact from the day shift. But that doesn't explain the light or the sound. You approach the door to the booth, noticing the latch is firmly in place. You use the heavy brass key, the sound of the tumblers clicking like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. You step inside. The air is stale, somehow older than the rest of the station. You look at the stone. It's smooth, black obsidian, cold to the touch. But as your fingers brush it, you feel a faint, electrical tingle, like static discharge. You also notice the air temperature inside the booth is inexplicably warmer than the control room. You look at the microphone. The gain is set to maximum, and the channel fader is pulled up, broadcasting nothing, but ready to capture everything. You quickly flip the gain down and slide the fader, silencing the phantom broadcast. Suddenly, the phone on the console outside the booth rings. It's a thick, heavy ring, an old-fashioned sound that cuts through the silence like broken glass. It's 3:08 a.m. You remember the first rule: never answer the phone after 3 o'clock a.m. Your mind races. Is this a test? Is it Sila's, checking if you're following the rules? You know that in many real-world haunted locations, like the Winchester Mystery House, the phenomena often follows patterns, almost like a dark logic is at work. Some researchers even posit that the energy necessary for a haunting is drawn from electromagnetic fields and human bioenergy, which peaks during periods of deep rest. But a ringing phone, that's too mundane, too easy to explain away. Yet, the atmosphere is screaming danger. The phone rings again, a demanding, insistent sound. Your skepticism is warring with a rising, animalistic fear. It's just a phone. If it's Sila's and you don't answer, you'll lose the job. If it's not Sila's, what then? The phone rings a third time, and you hear a faint tap from the dark hallway outside the control room. The sound of the tapping is what breaks your logic. It's not the phone that's dangerous. It's the second rule. The second rule says always keep the studio door ajar. You had closed the broadcast booth door to investigate the stone, a reflex of privacy, even though you were alone. You realize with a sickening jolt that in closing that door, you created a sealed boundary, the very thing the rule warns against. And now, the ringing phone is a distraction, a magnet drawing your focus, while the real danger is manifesting silently outside. You move to the door of the control room. The control room where the forbidden phone still rings, and you cautiously push the heavy panel open just an inch. The hallway outside is a long, fluorescent-lit tube, the kind of institutional architecture that always feels too bright and too cold at the same time. The WCHM logo, faded and peeling, seems to watch you from the end of the hall. That's when you see the shadow. It's tall, too tall for a man, and thin, standing just past the staff kitchen doorway. It doesn't move, but it doesn't look like a normal shadow either. It's too solid, a three-dimensional absence of light, a shadow figure that seems to absorb the faint, fluorescent glare. You remember that whisper in the attic, "No, wait, that's later." You remember the sound of the breath in the booth and the stone. This is the consequence of breaking the boundary. You instinctively reach for the phone on the console, a frantic need to end the noise, to silence the invitation. You know this is the ultimate trigger for the first rule. Never answer the phone after 3 o'clock a.m. But the figure in the hallway is worse. You have to break one to survive the other. You snatch the receiver. The ringing stops immediately. You lift it to your ear, heart hammering. And there is nothing. Not static, not a dial tone, not even the electronic hum of the line. Just a vast, cold vacuum of silence. A curious phenomenon is observed in psychological studies on the perception of fear, where the human brain is more terrified by silence than by noise, especially in an unnaturally quiet environment. This is because silence prevents the brain from generating patterns, forcing it to confront the unpredictable. The lack of anything on the line is a more effective terror than a scream. The shadowy figure shifts. It doesn't walk. It seems to shear through the air, gliding closer to the control room door. You drop the receiver back onto the cradle, and the moment it connects, the phone rings again. A frantic, desperate, new ring, not the old, measured sound. This time it rings from the staff lounge, further down the hall, away from the shadow. It's a trick, a manipulation. You glance back at the hall. The shadow is gone, completely. The space is empty, the fluorescence humming innocently. Then you hear a different sound. A low, mechanical grinding coming from the oldest, most forgotten part of the building. Studio B. This studio has been locked and unused since the 1970s. This is an invitation to explore, a trap. You recall the historical accounts of the Bell Witch haunting in Tennessee, where the entity seemed to manipulate the environment and communicate through selective sounds and voices, using a calculated psychological attack rather than brute force. You realize that you're not dealing with an aimless ghost. You're dealing with a conscious predator that understands rules and boundaries. You grab your brass key, deciding that the lesser of two evils is to confront the source of the new noise, rather than waiting for the shadows to return. The sound coming from Studio B isn't a scream or a crash. It's the methodical, scratchy loop of an antique record player, the kind with a heavy tone arm and a cabinet bass. You stand outside the door, the air here feeling thick, like stepping into warm water. This wing of the station is almost entirely derelict. The carpet is faded, the paint is peeling in long, brittle strips, and the very air tastes of formaldehyde and neglect. The door to Studio B is secured with a heavy, rusted padlock, one that looks like it hasn't been opened in decades. This is an intentional anomaly, a direct, taunting paradox. Something is playing inside, but nothing living could have entered. You look closely at the padlock. There are no signs of forced entry. You try the brass key, but it's too modern for this ancient lock. You check the laminated sheet of rules in your pocket. a vain attempt to find a fifth, secret rule about studio be nothing. You remember a curious historical oddity about the creation of the Ouija board. It was originally marketed as a harmless parlor game, a talking board. And it wasn't until later, when sensational reports of uncontrolled movement and communication with malevolent entities began to surface, that it entered the lexicon of genuine occult danger. The danger isn't the object, it's the intention behind using it. You realize the studio is a kind of intent trap, daring you to find a way in. You spot an old fire axe bolted to the wall nearby, caked in dust and marked with a faded inspection sticker from 1982. It feels dramatic, almost cliché, but the methodical scratch of the needle on the vinyl is driving you mad. You unbolt the axe, the metal grating loudly against the concrete wall, and with a single, desperate swing, you smash the padlock. The sound is deafening, a cascade of metal shrapnel and echoing clang that shatters the oppressive silence of the hall. The grinding music inside doesn't stop. You kick the heavy door open, and the air that rushes out is cold, carrying the faint, sweet smell of lilies and dust, a scent that shouldn't exist here. You step into the forgotten studio. It's a preserved snapshot of the 1970s. Shag carpet, burnt orange acoustic panels, and a massive, horseshoe-shaped broadcast console that looks like something out of a science fiction movie. In the center of the control desk, beneath a layer of fine, undisturbed dust, sits an old, portable Victrola record player, spinning a black 78 RPM record. You recognize the music immediately. It's a haunting, instrumental piece from the early 1940s, a piece titled Moonlight Serenade. You approach the player, your hand trembling as you lift the heavy tone arm. The music stops. The silence that follows is even heavier than before, a tangible vacuum that seems to press on your eardrums. That's when you see it, tucked beneath the console, beneath the layers of dust, is a small wooden box. It has no latch, no hinges, just a loose-fitting lid. You lift the lid, expecting another strange stone or a warning note. Instead, you find a collection of very old, yellowed photographs and one tightly rolled broadcast script, a profound psychological effect, known as patternicity, causes the human brain to seek and find meaning and patterns, even in random or meaningless noise. A survival mechanism that, in this environment, becomes a terrifying form of self-deception. You have to be careful not to create the ghost you're hunting. You pick up the top photograph. It's a handsome young man in a dated suit, smiling directly into the camera. His eyes, however, are slightly out of focus, giving him an unnerving, vacant stare. The back of the photo is inscribed with a name, Daniel Cross, and a date, October 18th, 1945. You unroll the script, the brittle paper crackling like dry leaves. It's a transcript for a final late-night broadcast, titled The Midnight Drift. The date is the same as the photograph, October 18th, 1945. The script starts normally. A smooth, professional introduction by the announcer, Daniel Cross, discussing the war's end and the hope for the future. The tone is classic 1940s radio, warm, reassuring, the voice of a trusted companion late at night. You follow the dialogue, your finger tracing the faded ink. Then, about halfway down the page, the script breaks. Daniel Cross's lines become erratic, switching from the scripted text to panicked, ad-libbed warnings. And friends, if you are listening now, I must tell you, the transmission is no longer clear. There is a noise. It is coming from the dead air itself. Do not. The next lines are marked with large, frantic cross-outs in what looks like a heavy fountain pen, indicating they were never spoken. The final lines of the script are chillingly simple. Static, just static. WCHM, good night. This is a record of his last words, his final broadcast. You realize that the date is today's date, 78 years ago to the hour. The concept of residual haunting, where an event, particularly a traumatic one, is somehow imprinted onto the environment like a recording, comes to mind. But this feels active, not residual. This feels like a planned anniversary warning. You look back at the photograph of Daniel Cross, his slightly unfocused eyes seeming to catch the ambient light. You wonder if this is how he disappeared. You recall a terrifying piece of folklore from old European radio history. The belief that certain isolated broadcast towers, due to their immense power and isolation, acted as lightning rods, not just for electricity, but for malevolent entities seeking a conduit to the wider world. The radio wave became a highway for the inhuman. You shiver, pulling your coat tighter, despite the inexplicable warmth in the room. You look around the studio, searching for another clue, another warning from the past. On the back of the control console, where the equipment cables should be, you find a small, tarnished silver locket. It's cheap, clearly a personal trinket. You open it. Inside is another tiny, faded fold. A woman, presumably Cross's fiancée or wife. But what catches your attention is the back of the locket. Engraved into the metal are 4 tiny symbols: a telephone with a line through it, a door half open, an eye with a slash, and the letters WCHM circled and crossed out. The 4 rules. Daniel Cross didn't just know them, he seemed to have codified them. He was not the cause of the horror, but its first victim, a failed sentinel. The studio light flickers, and you hear a soft, dry chuckle from the hallway. You know, without looking, that the shadowy figure has returned, drawn by your investigation. You snatch the locket and the script, leaving the studio and slamming the heavy axe door shut. The lock is gone, but the door is massive, buying you a moment. As you hurry back towards the main control room, you run directly into Silas, the caretaker. He is supposed to be miles away. He is standing in the middle of the hallway, holding a small, rolled-up sheaf of paper, and looking at you with those same sad, knowing eyes. He doesn't ask about the door, the axe, or the panic in your breath. He just extends the paper. "You shouldn't have gone in there," he says, his voice flat. "But since you did, you'll need this. The path changes when you listen to the wrong things." Silas doesn't wait for your reply, or your frantic apologies about the lock. He simply presses the rolled-up document into your hand. It's not a script. It's a crude, hand-drawn diagram of the WCHM tower's architectural blueprints, labeled with thick grease pencil. It's utterly baffling. A series of intersecting lines that don't align with the floor plan you've been cleaning. The roots are annotated with strange symbols: a coiled snake, a stylized sun, and a single, unnerving phrase scrawled across the paper's center: the broadcast to nowhere. He tells you this is the true map of the tower, the one that only appears when you are deemed worthy, or perhaps already too far gone. He points to a spot marked with the coiled snake, the basement. The frequency lock is down there. What you heard in Studio B, that was an echo. But the source is alive, down in the heart of the tower, he rasps. His voice barely a whisper. You look at his face, searching for a sign of sanity, a joke, a test. But his expression is solemn, his eyes dark pools reflecting the cold, fluorescent lights. He's telling the truth. An eerie or odd fact about the human condition comes to mind. Studies have shown that prolonged exposure to low-frequency infrasound, sounds below the human hearing threshold, often generated by natural events like wind or certain machinery, can induce feelings of anxiety, dread, and even the sensation of a presence. In a completely empty room, you realize the omnipresent. Low hum of the massive radio tower is likely generating this very kind of psychological terror. Silas warns you that the entity, the tower's shadow, is now actively tracking you because you have shown interest in its history. He explains that it wants to silence the warnings, to erase Daniel Cross's memory. Your task, he says, is to follow the map, find the hidden frequency panel, and see what he was trying to broadcast before he was silenced. It's the only way to break the cycle, Silas insists. He's standing too close now, and you can smell the metallic, ozone scent of the old equipment radiating off his clothes. You suddenly recall a terrifying historical parallel, the Mary Celeste, a brigantine ship found abandoned in the Atlantic in 1872, with all its lifeboats, crew, and cargo intact. Seemingly vanished into thin air, researchers still argue whether it was real. But the atmosphere here feels the same, a profound, unnatural disappearance, leaving behind only silence and cryptic clues. Your skeptical mind tries to interject. This is just a mentally unstable janitor, giving me a paranoid delusion. But the shadow, the phone, the stone, and the Victrola are all too real. You look at the map, tracing the line marked by a heavy dashed arrow that leads to a service elevator, not the main stairs. This is the hidden route. You thank Silas, but when you look up, he is already gone. Not walked away, but gone. Vanished into the darkness of the hallway with the same impossible speed as the shadow. You grasp the brass key in one hand and the static map in the other, and you step towards the rickety, dusty service elevator, the one that's been marked out of service since you arrived. You press the worn button and the lights flicker, but the cage begins its slow, grinding descent. You are going to the basement, the heart of the tower, and you know the air down there will be much, much colder. The service elevator is a rattling cage of rust and dust, smelling faintly of motor oil and stagnant water. It groans its way down, an agonizingly slow trip into the literal and metaphorical substrata of the tower. When the doors clank open, you are met with an air so thick and cold it feels like a physical barrier. This isn't the cold of a draft. It's a penetrating, unnatural chill that seems to drain the heat right out of your bones. You step onto the concrete floor of the basement, boiler, and blood room. The single exposed bulb hanging from the ceiling casts long, grotesque shadows that writhe with the slightest movement, making the vast space feel crowded and threatening. The room is dominated by a massive, archaic boiler, a rusted, sleeping beast with thick, serpentine pipes leading up into the darkness above. The smell of ozone is overwhelming here, mixed with a faint, coppery scent that your primitive brain immediately registers as blood. The basement is also home to the massive server racks that supposedly run the station's automation. They are humming loudly, their lights flashing in a frantic, unreadable pattern that seems to mock your presence. You pull out the static map and follow Silas's instructions. The path leads you behind the sleeping boiler. You remember that eerie or odd fact that pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful images in random visual stimuli, is heavily influenced by emotional states. In a high-stress, low-light environment like this basement, every shadow, every glint of metal is interpreted by your brain as a threatening face or form. You try to keep your breathing even, telling yourself the anxiety is just a trick of the low-frequency hum. You find a narrow, almost hidden crawl space behind the boiler, covered by a sheet of dirty canvas. You pull the canvas aside, and the air that escapes is even colder, carrying with it a distinct, palpable sense of dread. This is the route marked with the coiled snake. You recall the ancient serpent cults and the folklore surrounding subterranean passages and tunnels, often considered gateways to the underworld or homes to primordial evils, reinforcing the primal fear of the deep, dark below. Researchers still argue whether it was real, but the universal terror of the crypt suggests an innate historical wisdom about what hides beneath the surface. You drop to your hands and knees and squeeze into the crawl space. It's tight, dusty, and you can hear the faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water from some unseen leak. Your flashlight beam cuts through the oppressive darkness, revealing walls covered in heavy, black mildew. You crawl for what feels like an eternity, and just when the crushing weight of the earth above you becomes unbearable, you emerge into a small, cylindrical chamber. This is not on any normal blueprint. It's a stone room perfectly round, and in the center sits a single, isolated console. This is the frequency lock. This is where Daniel Cross tried to transmit his warning. The console is heavy brass, covered in obsolete dials and switches, and humming with a vibrant, unnatural energy. There is a single, glowing red display panel, which shows only 3 digits, 47.9, an unauthorized, locked frequency, a broadcast band that shouldn't exist. You are in the locked frequencies chamber, and the 3 digits, 47.9, burn into your mind. You know all radio bands, AM, FM, shortwave, and that number is completely outside the legal broadcast spectrum for this region. It's a number that exists only in the heart of this tower, a frequency for a broadcast to nowhere, or perhaps a broadcast from nowhere. The brass console before you is a monstrous thing, covered in switches labeled with faded, unsettling words: echo, void, gate, and threshold. You realize that Daniel Cross, in 1945, must have built or found this console, trying to use the tower's power for something other than regional news and music. You examine the dials. One large, central dial is labeled WCHM Freak. Lock. It's currently set to the forbidden 47.9. Your hand hovers over it, an internal battle raging between your instinct for self-preservation and an overwhelming, desperate curiosity. You remember the locket, the script, the terror in the studio. You have to know what he was trying to say. You recall the eerie or odd fact about electronic voice phenomena, Ebb, the idea that disembodied voices or sounds from other dimensions can be captured by audio recording equipment, often on unauthorized or dead frequencies. What if this console isn't for broadcasting out, but for listening in? You decide to try and unlock the channel before attempting to transmit. You look for a key, a combination, anything, tucked into the side of the console. You find a small, leather-bound notebook. It's Daniel Cross's journal. You flip through the pages until you find the entry for October 18th, 1945. His final words detail the unlocking process. The lock holds the silence. The silence is the name. To unlock, the name must be written but never spoken. You understand. The station's call sign, WCHM. You use a dusty pencil stub you find nearby and carefully write the 4 letters in the small, recessed display area next to the frequency dial. The moment the last letter is drawn, a sharp, white flash of electricity arcs from the console to the center dial, and the heavy brass knob turns with a loud, metallic clunk. The digital display snaps from 47.9 to 101.9, a completely standard, functional FM frequency. The channel is unlocked, but there's a new sound now, a high-pitched, insistent whining from the levels meter, even though you haven't touched the echo or void switches. It's a sound of unbearable pressure, like the atmosphere is collapsing around you. You are close to breaking the 3rd rule, the one about the attic window, because the whine is emanating from above, pulling your attention upward. You remember the folklore surrounding the Spread Eagle Hall haunting, where the entities were said to only be visible from a specific, high vantage point, a kind of dark optical illusion that lured victims to the tower's peak. Researchers still argue whether it was real, but the pull on your mind is undeniable, an almost physical craving to see the source of the noise. You leave the unlocked console, feeling an overwhelming, urgent need to ascend. You realize that by unlocking the frequency, you have made the tower vulnerable. You race back through the crawl space, the coppery scent of the basement intensifying as you go, towards the main stairwell that leads to the upper levels, and the forbidden attic window. You ascend the steel stairwell, the frantic whining noise growing louder and sharper with every flight. The whine is not an external sound. It feels like it's vibrating in the center of your skull, a pressure behind your eyes. Your limbs feel heavy. Your will feels compromised, as if you are being pulled on a chain. You are heading directly for the 3rd rule warps. Do not, under any circumstances, look out the attic window. You know the shadow figure is down below, blocked by the massive boiler and the heavy crawl space. The danger now is psychological, a manipulation of your vision and focus. The attic door is a low, unpainted slab of wood at the top of the tower's structure, marked only by a small, hand-painted sign. No entry, tower maintenance only. You shoulder it open, and the whine becomes a deafening shriek. The room is vast, triangular, and choked with the tower's primary transmission wires. Thick, high-voltage cables that snake across the floor like dark, sleeping pythons. The air is electric, smelling powerfully of burnt ozone and static. In the center of the far wall is a single, small, circular window, the forbidden window. It's low to the ground, no bigger than a porthole, and completely coated in decades of black soot and grime. Nothing could possibly be seen through it. You remember that whisper in the attic, "No, wait." that was from the story of Daniel Cross, the one you're reliving. You remember the fear on the line, yet the pressure to look is overwhelming. The shadow figure wants you to break this rule. Why? You recall a curious psychological phenomenon known as scrying or crystal gazing, where continuous, unfocused staring at a reflective or non-defined surface can induce mild hypnotic states, causing the brain to hallucinate images and visions. Perhaps the window isn't for looking out, but for looking in a reflection, a portal, or a kind of induced vision. You find a stiff brush in a cleaning bucket, and you begin to scrub the soot from the glass. With every frantic pass of the bristles, a small area of glass is revealed, until finally, a clean, clear circle is exposed. You drop the brush, its clang absorbed instantly by the electric air. You lean in, your face mere inches from the cold glass, bracing yourself for something terrible, a grotesque face, a cityscape of the dead, a vision of the past. But you see only the black night, the fog, and the blinking red aeronautical light far above on the tower itself. Nothing, utterly, terrifyingly nothing. You slump back, relief washing over you. The rule was just a trick of psychology, a warning against induced fear. Then you see it. It's not in the night sky. It's in the reflection, in the clean circle of glass, reflecting the room behind you. You see the massive tangle of high-voltage cables. But one cable is moving. One thick, dark cable, snaking slowly, deliberately, down the side of the wall, directly towards the open attic door. It is moving with a life of its own, an impossibly large, muscular organism of wire and copper, and it is heading for the stairwell you just climbed. You are trapped in the attic, with a living cable blocking the escape route, and the constant, high-pitched whine making your head feel ready to split open. You think of the phantom of the opera folklore, how the monster often manipulated the structure and mechanics of its environment to trap and control. Researchers still argue whether the initial accounts were based on a real person or were purely fiction, but the reality of this moving cable is undeniable. You have looked out the window, and now the tower itself is your enemy. You must find another way down, and quickly, before the shadow uses the tower's wiring to literally cut off your escape. The moving cable is too large and too fast to try and step around. You slam the attic door shut, the action a futile gesture against a thing made of wire, but it buys you a single second of assessment. You are breathing heavily, the ozone in the air tasting like pennies and fear. You scramble across the floor, away from the door, seeking another way down. You find a small, unused vent cover on the floor near the chimney stack, one of the original brick parts of the tower structure. It's small, maybe big enough for a child to squeeze through, but it leads somewhere. You use the heavy cleaning brush you dropped to lever the metal cover off the vent. Beneath it is a dark, vertical shaft, smelling faintly of coal smoke and old plaster. It's a desperate gambit, but better than being strangled by a live wire. You slip into the shaft, the grit and dust of old building falling around you, and slide down, scraping your hands and knees on the rough interior. You drop out onto the second floor, the break room level. You are breathing a sigh of relief when you stand up and see your reflection in the long, dark, uncurtained glass of the break room window. Staring back at the foggy night outside, you move your head a nervous tick, and your reflection follows. but just a fraction of a second too slow. It's a subtle, almost imperceptible lag, like a poorly synced video feed. You move your hand to your hair. Your reflection's hand meets its hair a beat later. Then it starts to catch up, its movements snapping into sync. You remember the eerie or odd fact about the uncanny valley theory, the psychological revulsion or unease felt when one encounters entities that are close to, but not perfectly, human. This is the shadow's new game, a mocking imitation, an attempt to break your sense of self. You quickly reach out to touch the glass. The air between your hand and your reflection's hand is cold, and you feel the slight, familiar electrical tingle, like static. And then the reflection's hand doesn't just meet yours. It presses against the glass, pushing slightly, and its face contorts into a wide, unsettling smile that is not yours. A smile that shows too many teeth, eyes that are too wide. You jump back, your heart lurching. The reflection's smile lingers for 1 second longer than it should have. A silent, terrifying laugh at your fear before it snaps back to your neutral expression. You recall the real-world horror of the poltergeist phenomena, often attributed to psychokinetic energy produced by a specific person, usually a troubled adolescent, causing physical disturbances and manipulation of objects. Researchers still argue whether it was real, but this is a targeted psychological attack, a phenomenon focused entirely on you. The door to the stairwell, the one you just used, slams shut with a terrifying finality. You are cut off again. But you know where you have to go, back to the control room, back to the source of the broadcast. You need to use the unlocked frequency, 101.9, to send Daniel Cross's warning. You race past the staff kitchen, past the ringing phone, which is now ringing slowly, mournfully, from the main control console, and you burst through the door. The control room is dark, not just off, but completely and utterly dark. Every single light, every panel, every monitor, every server indicator, all are dead. The low, comforting hum of the equipment that has been your constant companion is gone. The silence is absolute, heavier than anything you have felt tonight. A crushing blackness that seems to absorb not just light, but sound and hope. This is the silence of the air. The power to the WCHM tower has been cut, and the backup generator hasn't kicked in. You realize this isn't a regional blackout. The streetlights outside the control room window are still glowing faintly in the fog. The power was cut only to the broadcast equipment, to the console, to the lights, to the things that allow human communication. The tower's shadow has deliberately isolated you, silencing the channel to prevent your message. Your only light is the faint beam of your phone's screen, illuminating the dead, black panels of the mixing board. The phone, incidentally, has no service. The tower's electromagnetic field, which once provided a faint signal, is now a dead zone. You remember the chilling fact that deep-sea divers often report a profound sense of spatial disorientation when their lights fail in the crushing, absolute blackness of the ocean floor. Unable to discern up from down, that is your environment now, a deep sea of absolute, paralyzing darkness. You are fully alone. You remember the locked frequency console in the basement. It runs on a different, dedicated power source, the emergency transmitter, a final, insulated power loop. You still have a chance. But to get there, You have to go back down into the depths, and you have to do it in the complete dark, navigating the long, silent hallways. You reach into your pocket, your fingers closing around the cold, brass key, the only tangible link to the outside world. You hear a sound then, one that makes your blood freeze in your veins. A faint, dry scratching sound, coming from inside the ventilation duct directly above the control console. It sounds exactly like a fingernail dragging across dry metal. You recall the terrifying folklore of the Jersey Devil, a creature said to inhabit the New Jersey Pine Barrens, often heard as a scream or a frantic scratching sound from the dark woods or rafters, an entity that exists to punish trespassers and those who broke the rules of man or nature. Researchers still argue whether it was real, but the sound overhead is the sound of something impatient. It is moving in the ductwork, hunting you. You look down at the floor, thinking about the quickest route to the basement service elevator. You realize that to reach it, you have to cross the wide-open main hall where the shadow figure first appeared. You have to move quickly and silently. But then, you hear the other sound, a heavy, scraping thud from the far end of the hallway, near the staff entrance. The ductwork creature is above, and the shadow is below, blocking the stairs. You are cornered in the control room. Your eyes frantically scan the dark room for any point of egress, anything you might have missed during your cleaning rounds, and you spot it, a small, unlocked utility door labeled Cable Access, hidden behind the server rack, leading to a narrow chute that bypasses the main stairwell. It's an almost perfect, hidden escape route, but as you push the door open, ready to climb in, you hear the fourth rules price whispering in the darkness, a faint, cold breath right next to your ear. Say it. Say the name. It is tempting you to break the final, most catastrophic rule: never speak the station's full call sign out loud. The whisper is cold and dry, and it feels like a physical violation of your personal space in the absolute dark. It's an invitation to utter the station's call sign, WCHM. You remember Silas's panicked warning, the one he delivered in a whisper. The moment you speak it, the tower's shadow is fully invited in. The boundary between the world and the void collapses. The final rule isn't about avoiding a curse. It's about maintaining a metaphysical lock. You press your hand over your mouth, the physical gesture a desperate attempt to contain the word, the sound, the dangerous broadcast. The shadow has you trapped. If you stay here, the scratching thing in the ductwork will find you. If you go, the shadow is waiting. If you speak the call sign, you open the door completely. But the temptation is immense. You remember a curious psychological study that showed when people are subjected to extreme, prolonged stress, their brains will often seek the quickest, most final solution, even if that solution is self-destructive, a form of cognitive capitulation to end the uncertainty. That's what the whisper is offering, the end of the game. You resist, shaking your head in the darkness. You turn and squeeze into the narrow utility chute, pulling the cable access door closed just as the scratching sound in the main vent bursts into a frantic, violent rattling, followed by a heavy, metallic thud as the ductwork creature apparently hits a junction and stops. The chute is claustrophobic and smelling of aged copper and dust, but it's a straight, dark drop. You slide down, using your hands and feet to brake, the metallic grate of the chute scraping against your clothes. You land with a soft thump on a pile of old insulation and wiring. You are in a sublevel maintenance tunnel, one that runs directly beneath the main hallway. The tunnel is silent, dark, and thankfully, it leads straight to the back entrance of the service elevator shaft. You move quickly, ducking beneath thick, low-slung pipes. Then you hear it again, the sound that stopped you in the control room, the heavy, purposeful, slow scraping sound of metal against metal. It is not coming from above. It is coming from the main stairwell, the one leading up from the ground floor. It is the sound of the tower's shadow beginning its methodical ascent. You are hearing the stairwell of whispers. The scraping is too rhythmic, too intentional to be a falling object. It sounds like something immense, something with heavy, clawed limbs, dragging itself up the steel stairs, one step at a time. Scrape, pause. The sound is slow, powerful, and utterly terrifying in its inevitability. You recall the historical terror surrounding the Highgate vampire legend in London, where an alleged supernatural entity was seen moving with an unnatural, gliding movement up the stairwells of the abandoned cemetery. Researchers still argue whether it was a real entity or a mass hysteria event. But the sound you are hearing is real, and it is getting closer to your location with every dreadful scrape. You realize the shadow must have found the access point to the main building. You burst out of the tunnel and throw open the service elevator door. You don't wait for the cage. You leap into the black shaft and begin scrambling down the thick, greasy cables, hand over hand, in a desperate, final descent to the basement. You have to get to that console. You have to send Daniel Cross's message before the scraping reaches the main floor. Your hands are burning, slick with cable grease and sweat. As you slide down the elevator shaft, the heavy scrape is still echoing in the stairwell, and you hear it reverberate through the sheer metal of the shaft, getting steadily louder, steadily closer. It's coming for the basement now, drawn to the open access of the frequency lock. You drop the final 10 feet, landing hard on the concrete floor of the basement, near the massive, dark server racks. The boiler room is pitch black, but your feet know the path now. You crawl quickly back toward the hidden crawl space. You remember that whisper in the attic, the feeling of the wrongness closing in. The shadow is not just a figure, it's a force, a principle of silence trying to extinguish any form of communication. You squeeze into the crawl space, ignoring the dust and the coppery smell, moving on pure instinct. You are focused on one single goal, the brass console, the unlocked frequency. You emerge into the small, cylindrical chamber. The air here is still, but the scent of ozone is intense, and the brass console is glowing faintly. A low, ominous red light coming from the unlocked frequency dial, now set to the standard 101.9. You have maybe 60 seconds before the shadow reaches the bottom of the main stairs and finds the crawl space. You throw yourself at the console, frantically flipping switches. You locate the central microphone input, a heavy, dust-covered jack, and you remember the only piece of equipment you brought with you, your phone. You have no service, but the microphone is functional. You pull out the locket Daniel Cross left, the one with the 4 rules, and place it on the center of the console. This is not about broadcasting your fear. It's about broadcasting his truth. You see the switch labeled gate and flip it on. The dial on the console, which should be set to the basement's power source, begins to flicker violently. You frantically look for the recording device. You are not going to talk. You are going to play Daniel Cross's script. You pull the brittle script out of your jacket pocket. You'll read his final, unscripted warning into your phone's microphone. A desperate broadcast to nowhere. You recall the eerie or odd fact that during the Cold War, many governments utilized number stations, shortwave radio broadcasts of seemingly random voices reading sequences of numbers to transmit coded messages to spies, creating a ghost frequency that was undeniably there but ultimately uncrackable. You are about to create your own ghost frequency. One last, final, desperate warning. You place your phone's microphone near the script, your voice low and trembling, trying to mimic the urgency of the man who died here decades ago. You start reading Cross's final, unscripted lines. There is a noise. It is coming from the dead air itself. Do not. You stop. The sound of the scraping stops. Immediately. There is an absolute, instantaneous silence in the entire tower. The only sound is your own ragged breathing in the small chamber. The shadow is listening. You know what it wants. It wants you to finish the message, to complete the broadcast, so it can silence you forever. You must transmit the rest of the script. You take a deep, shaky breath and continue reading the desperate words of Daniel Cross, your voice strained with adrenaline and terror. You read the lines he crossed out, the ones he was too scared or too controlled to utter. The transmission is no longer clear. They are listening. They hate the sound of human intention. Lock the door. Never look up. Never say the name. You are broadcasting on the authorized frequency of 101.9, using the basement's emergency transmitter, the signal bypassing the main power cut. You see the needle on the console's level meter twitching wildly, confirming that the message is going out. You are sending the final warning. The moment you finish the last line, you hear a sound far more terrifying than the scrape. It is a sound of immense, unbridled fury, a deep, resonant crack from the main stairwell above. The shadow is no longer ascending slowly. It has broken its own rhythmic rule and is now rushing toward your location. You scramble to the main frequency dial, your hand shaking as you prepare to switch the transmitter off, to complete the circuit and silence the broadcast. But then you look at the locket, resting on the console, and you see the image of Daniel Cross's wife, staring out from the tarnished silver. The message isn't complete until the full, devastating reality is sent. You pull the mic back and whisper one final sentence, a truth you've pieced together from the rules, the shadow, and the history. The tower is not haunted. The tower is a battery, and it's alive. You finish the sentence, and the basement air seems to compress. The shadow is now in the boiler room. You can hear the low, wet, heavy sound of its breathing, a sound like a massive pair of bellows coming from just outside the crawl space. You remember that eerie or odd fact about the psychological phenomenon of contagious fear. In a group setting, one person's panic can trigger a cascade of terror in others. Your intent is to trigger that panic in the listening world, to make the idea of the tower something dangerous, to create a collective resistance. You slam the console's power switch down. The red light winks out. The humming stops. The room is instantly plunged into absolute darkness, save for the faint glow of your phone screen. You hear a sound, a terrible, shattering roar of frustration and rage from the crawl space opening. The shadow is blocked by the crawl space, but it is too close. You quickly turn and begin to scramble back into the narrow space, desperate to escape. You recall the historical accounts of the terror case, the 18th century Frenchman with an insatiable, horrifying appetite, a real-life horror show of biology gone wrong. Researchers still argue whether the claims were exaggerated or fully real. But the atmosphere here feels like that, a primal, all-consuming hunger that is now focused entirely on you. You realize you have sent the message, but you haven't escaped the price. As you pull your legs into the crawl space, you look back at the cylindrical chamber. The shadow has torn the canvas covering from the hole. You see it not as a shadow, but as a writhing mass of black, copper-colored wire and sinew. Its immense, dark head filling the opening. Its two eyes glowing with a malevolent, furious red light. And then the room fills with an ear-splitting, broadcast silencing static. The static is not just a sound. It is a physical force, a white noise that feels like sand grinding against your eardrums, a complete erasure of thought and sanity. It is the shadow's ultimate defense, the final broadcast of the void. You scramble blindly, desperately through the crawl space, the static pressure so intense you think your skull is going to crack. You burst out into the main boiler room, the silence of the tower momentarily returning. But you know it's a trick, a brief moment of calm before the final confrontation. You run toward the service elevator shaft, but you know it's too late. The heavy breathing of the shadow is right behind you now, wet and metallic. You feel the air grow impossibly cold, the ozone scent becoming an acrid sting in your nostrils. You remember the terrifying folklore of the Mandela effect, the idea that collective false memories are evidence of alternate realities bleeding into ours. You wonder if this tower, this place, is a kind of Mandela effect generator, manipulating the very fabric of history and reality through its dead air. You hear the final, chilling sound, the distinct clack-clack of the shadow's copper claws on the concrete floor, closing the distance. You turn to face it, not in defiance, but in a final, resigned moment of clarity. The shadow is an immense, multi-limbed creature, its body a tapestry of dark, moving cables, its head a distorted, human-like shape with those two burning red eyes. You realize that your final warning was heard. You know you failed the fourth rule in the control room when the whisper offered the choice, and you chose action over silence. But that's okay. You made the final transmission, and in that last, terrible second of awareness, as the shadow lunges forward, its massive, wired body filling your vision, you see the room around you begin to fade. The concrete walls, the boiler, the server racks, they all begin to shimmer, turning transparent, then collapsing into a field of pure, undifferentiated static. The last thing you see is the single, clear image of Daniel Cross's locket, lying on the floor, surrounded by the white noise, its tiny, silver surface reflecting the red eyes of the charging entity. Then, the broadcast is entirely gone. The light, the sound, the fear, all replaced by the roar of the void. A silent, static death. The tower has consumed another soul, another voice that tried to break its silence. You hear, not with your ears, but with the dying parts of your mind, the last words of the shadow, a cold, echoing whisper that fills the static. WCHM. Good night. Hey guys, that was a heavy one. You can slowly turn on a little light now. Maybe put on some soft music, or just listen to the sound of your own house settling. You've been through a lot with me tonight, down into that freezing basement, up into that terrifying attic, and into the heart of the WCHM tower. Feel the comfort of your own walls, the reliability of your own light switches, the predictable, lovely hum of normal electricity. The shadow is gone. The static has cleared. You're back in your space. And I'm here too, just a voice in the dark, reminding you that all those rules and all that terror belong to the story, to the other side of the screen. Thank you for tuning in tonight and for facing the dead air with me. Don't worry about the whispers. They were just part of the script. Don't worry about the rules. They only apply to the people who work the night shift at the radio station. Let the anxiety drain out of your hands and your shoulders. You're safe, you're warm, and you're here. Close your eyes. Let the silence be gentle. Let the night be long and restful. End of script. Sleep peacefully if you can. End of script. Sleep peacefully